The yin and yang of pure strength and health. Charles Poliquin on the Genius Network.
We have a saying in sport, what does third place taste like? Cake, right? So, so the thing is that she was very, very committed. But she, for example, learned Japanese so she could understand what the coach was telling her on the mat to her opponent so she could figure out the next move.
Wow.
So, you know, Helen, of all the athletes I've coached in my life, is probably the most detail-orientated athlete that did every single thing. She watched YouTube videos of her fighting. She could understand her moves. One of the biggest myths is that it takes a lot of work to get a good physique. And I mean, Tim Ferriss wrote a book called The 4-Hour Body. Yeah, but I think that 4 hours a week is plenty. Even my top-level athletes, as far as strength training is concerned, it's about 4 hours a week. But there's no messing around when I train, right? The way I explain to people is that you're like an oil lamp, and the flame is the yang energy. So the bigger you can burn the flame, it's great. So people, you know, spend a lot of their energy, but the problem is they don't take care of the oil. That's what we call the yin reserve. The two biggest stressors are related to their mouth. In other words, it's the things we say, and it's what we put in our bodies. And the thing that happens is that you never had somebody say, oh man, I was so stressed last night, all I could eat was Brussels sprouts, right? So people will say, okay, I was so stressed last night, I went to 3 boxes of Pringles, you know, 2 kilos of chocolate chip cookies, blah, 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 blah. So we tend to self-medicate with carbohydrates. Why? Because we found out a long time ago that cortisol, which is a stress hormone, is lowered by insulin, right? But the problem with insulin, it's your friend sometimes, but for most of us, it's the enemy, because insulin is the hormone of aging. So the more insulin you make, the faster you age. And controlling the fat loss process is managing insulin. The more you can control your insulin, the better you will do. I've worked with a lot with the hockey players, football players, and I got to make it very simple for them. So I say, ask them a question. I said, ask yourself, did the food you're going to put in your mouth was accessible to a caveman? And I run a test. So I go like steak. Oh yes, a caveman could have that. And then donuts. And they go, ooh. Is there a donut tree? No. Pop. Is there a river? Pop river? So if a caveman had access to the food, you can eat it. So that's a very simple rule to simplify our eating habits. The grains started to get popularized in ancient Egypt. And then what we saw though, if you look at skeletal remains, is that that's when we start to have degenerative diseases. We used to be much taller, much more muscular when we were living more off a Paleolithic diet. As they land, they say, oh, we're now going to prepare for landing. Well, you should drink about 1.5 liter of water. Why? Because if you ever notice, it's really hard to fall asleep if you got to pee, right? So basically, when you drink a lot, you activate the kidney meridian, which is the energy meridian. So you drink a lot of water. Then this thing you should pull out of your briefcase or your purse is caviar. Caviar is probably one of the best brain-building foods, and you have to reset your neurotransmitters. And the yang neurotransmitters are dopamine and acetylcholine. So you could have caviar, or you could have, if you don't like fish, you could have roast beef. Okay? But it has to be a meat or a fish that contains a lot of tyrosine, because to make dopamine, you need tyrosine. So that would be a thing. And then the second thing I would eat is macadamia nuts, because macadamia nuts contain a lot of levels of choline, and choline will fire up your brain.
Annotated and summarized. Easy to share with loved ones. The description below the title for this video has these summary points. Charles Poliquin, perhaps the world's leading strength coach for Olympic and professional athletes. From Canada, authored 8 books, created the Strength Sensei company. He died in September 2018. Talking about one of his clients, Helen Maroulis. 2016 Rio Olympics, the first ever American to win gold in the women's freestyle wrestling. She learned Japanese in order to understand the opponent's coach. She was the most detail-oriented athlete he had ever worked with. She would watch YouTube videos of opponents to understand their moves. He says, one of the biggest myths it takes a lot of work to get a great physique. He says, really, 4 hours a week is plenty if it's done right. Even top-level professional athletes need only 4 hours a week for the strength training portion, but no messing around. Our body is like an oil lamp. The flame is like the yang energy. The bigger burning flame is great, but the problem is people don't take care of the oil, the yin energy. Our two biggest stressors are connected to our mouth, what we say, and what we put into our body. You never have someone say, "Oh, I was so stressed that I could only eat Brussels sprouts." We tend to self-medicate with carbohydrates. Cortisol, a stress hormone, is lowered by insulin, and we know that insulin is raised by eating carbohydrates. The problem? Insulin is the hormone of aging. The more you make, the faster you age. Controlling the fat loss process is managing insulin. More control is better. Charles says, for hockey and football players, I make it simple. Would the food that you're about to eat have been accessible to cavemen? Steak? Yes. Donuts? No. Soda pop? No. Grains? Actually very little. They became popular in ancient Egypt. That is when the population started to have degenerative diseases. He says, we were much stronger and taller when we ate a Paleolithic diet. Jet lag? Prepare for landing? Drink 1.5 liters of water. It activates the kidney meridian in Chinese medicine. It's the energy meridian. Eat caviar, it resets the brain neurotransmitters. The yang neurotransmitters, dopamine and acetylcholine. You could have roast beef, but it must be meat or fish that contains a lot of tyrosine. Also, eat macadamia nuts. They have a lot of choline to fire up the brain.